Today on the PIO podcast, we are joined by a leader who stands at the intersection of wildfire response and strategic communications. It's in one of the most fire-prone states in the nation. Nick Schuler is the Deputy Director of Communications and Incident Awareness for the CAL FIRE Department. He is at the CAL FIRE Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, where he plays a central role in shaping how the department communicates with the public and his partners. Nick started his career with CAL FIRE in 1998 as a firefighter one and moved his ways up all the way into an executive position. And he also served as a Type 1 incident management team member and helped build communication strategies for some of the major disasters that have hit that area. He holds degrees in organizational leadership, emergency management, and is a certified Chief Fire Officer and Public Information Officer. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, you started way back when, like you and I are both getting old, and 1998, and you rose through all these different positions and got yourself to deputy director. How did that frontline experience shape your approach to communication?
Well, it's an interesting question, and quite honestly, I ask myself that often. When you begin as a firefighter, the last thing you ever want to do is spend every day sitting in front of a computer and going to meetings, which is exactly a lot of what I do today. But I think the real lesson learned was I was always looking for an opportunity to better myself, to diversify my career. So as I started out as a firefighter, I had, various opportunities to get on teaching cadres that made me uncomfortable speaking in front of, my fellow coworkers, getting an opportunity to work on a helicopter or manage inmate hand crews, a variety of times. 18 years on a Type 1 incident management team in a variety of positions, from the planning section to operations section chief to deputy incident commander and PIO. What it allows me to do is when I'm speaking to the public, it allows me to reflect on the diversity I have in my career and not just hearing about it, but actually doing those various positions and doing my best to represent each of those functions when I talk.
I like the way you put that together. That's really well done. That kind of like just jumps right into that next question I have is, what lessons from field leadership and incident command have proved most valuable in managing communications during a complex statewide emergency?
Well, I think the first thing is people often get confused that rank equals leadership, and it doesn't. Leadership is leadership, whether you're a first-year firefighter or a 30-year fire chief, and people who are chief officers doesn't mean they're great leaders either. So I think the biggest thing for me, it was when I go in and I'm working a large-scale disaster or now managing that from a communications perspective is number one, all PIOs think they need to be talking all the time. And I think the first part is listening. And so really understanding what the problem is, evaluating it in a methodical way, and then supporting your staff and leading them and providing them the resources they need to manage all types of disasters. For our agency, we run over 600,000 calls a year. And so our call volume is very diversified. And when you're running about a call a minute year round, you have to have a good team.
Yeah, isn't that true? And, you guys, that's the one thing I always tell people. If they ever have an opportunity to go shadow a PIO in CAL FIRE, that's you're going to learn so much so rapidly because of what they deal with on a day-to-day basis, especially when the emergency is at hand. So I always tell people, if they get that opportunity, go shadow them when you can, because it's a great experience. So let's go into the next one. Communications in wildfire season has evolved rapidly in recent years. What are some of the biggest changes in the way wildfire communication methods have you seen or led recently?
Well, I think number one, when people think about wildfires, historically in California, they thought about that as a backcountry problem. It only happens in the rural areas, and a fire season, quote unquote. And what we have been preaching for years is that wildfire is a problem throughout California and actually across the nation. And it's not just a seasonal problem. I don't have to take us any farther back than January of 2025, where Los Angeles was devastated by the Palisades-Eaton and the Eaton fires. And I think, for us, it's to leverage our messaging to make sure people understand that it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when you are going to be impacted by a wildfire in California. And so as we talk about that, we have to find unique ways to get the message out. Number one, we have to continue leveraging technology. That is a big push in our organization, not just from a response perspective and a prevention perspective, but a communications perspective. And for us, just to give you a little example is we had more than 75 million people visit our website in 3 weeks. And
Wow.
so, you have to have a robust website. You have to have ways to communicate effectively. You also have to have strong cybersecurity efforts. We had 188,000 cyber attacks on our website during those 3 weeks of not people trying to take our website down, and trying to cause more chaos in our state, and not one of them was successful. And so we're very proud of that, but recognize that's always a moving target. I think the other thing is we have to be listening to what our community wants. For us, we use a layer basically that immediately analyzes the community where that wildfire is impacted, so we can quickly look at the demographics. What are the languages being spoken? We're going to have to talk different to people who are elderly than people who are young. And I don't mean necessarily our messaging, but how we're getting that messaging to them. Is it an area that has cellular coverage or it doesn't? All of these things have to be quickly analyzed. And if you're not leveraging some of those community demographic layers that are available, you may be missing the mark.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back 1 second. You've talked about the number of cyber attacks that you had on your department website. That could be a whole conversation alone, but I think that's something that a lot of PIOs, that's not their initial worry. And when a major incident happens, I think that's probably something that happens to most. They're just not aware that it's happening at the time it's happening.
It's a great point. And I think, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, is when people say PIOs, they think about a very surface level position that just simply goes and talks to the media, right? Where what we're doing, or at least in my role, is I'm managing a large scale program. And if you think about a communications person for a large business, our organization's a $5 billion a year business. That's what CAL FIRE is, right? And so the communication strategy that's associated with that is much more than speaking with the media. It's leveraging those relationships with your partners to look at things like cyber threats, to look at how we're going to continue to operate if these things impact our organization. And you don't have to be the expert. I'm definitely not in cybersecurity, but I have a partner, Scott Gregory, who is, and his staff ensures that that's happening. But we had to prepare for that long before the threats even began. And that really started in 2020 when we did a complete revamp of our website. We really looked holistically at how users were using our website, what were they looking at, and we redeveloped the whole website based on what the users were coming to find, not what we thought was important. And that has really gained a lot of traction.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So you revamped it to provide a lot of real-time data, if I'm understanding this correctly. Can you talk about the process of developing that and the challenges that you encountered?
Yeah, when most people think about how they're going to communicate, they think about their small town, their small city. What we had to really evaluate is, how do we coordinate our PIOs that are from the border of Mexico to the border of Oregon, and hundreds or thousands of calls all happening at the same time. And for us, we sat down with our technology team, we sat down with our PIOs several years ago, and we said, how do we strategize about this? And essentially, in real basic simple terms, we created an internal mobile application that push information in real time into a CRM, and that CRM feeds our website. And not only is it the human in the loop of pushing information from the PIO perspective, but it also includes automation from our Intel aircraft that provide mapping, from our 911 dispatchers who are putting in information. And so we had to also analyze what's intelligence versus information, what's appropriate. And we've created a pretty good system. We continue to refine that. We're moving into a mobile platform in 2026 that will provide push notifications and a mobile app that complements the website. Historically, in wildfire communication, everything was around what they call the ICS, the 209 system, which came out at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., which was really an antiquated way of distributing information and not enough for public consumption. And we changed that to be able to push data, at least during the recent wildfires, about 100 times a day. We were pushing microbursts of information, updated road closures, updated evacuations, updated containment acres, things that were providing the public what they needed to know.
All right, so and again, this is a redundant question because we already talked about it. Technology, you guys are using it in a variety of different ways. You're blending drones and aircraft, and then the firefighters on the ground out in the field, and whatever real-time data you can get, highway stuff. Are you using any AI or anything like that to assist you in that endeavor?
Yeah, a little. We are, but there's much more than AI for us as well, right? So the department has a fire innovation unit that's continually analyzing and leveraging future technologies, and not just analyzing them, but also working with these companies to determine what are the needs of the fire service, and how do we use that to better serve, again, not just in response, but fire prevention efforts, response, and recovery.
Right. How, all right, so you've already talked about the layering that you use to identify how you communicate with certain communities, whether it's the elderly or the different communities where the language is going to be spoken differently. Have you run into limits or limitations when it comes to language barrier and getting that information across to the public?
Yeah, we have. And in California, it's very diverse, right? And so we have to recognize that we're not going to walk into every community and have a person that speaks that language. And so what we also have to do is leverage relationships. And part of those relationships is understanding who are those people in the community that we can engage with, because they may be the trusted source of information. So if we can meet with them, they can not only help us bridge that gap, but also provide us feedback on things that the community is interested in hearing. Each community is very diverse. In some communities, we've had large scale disasters where the number one priority was for the farmers to get back into their flower fields to water, because if they can't water within 24 hours, they start to lose their crops. Or in the Napa area, where there's billions of dollars of wineries, and fires happen oftentimes during picking season, and the impacts of smoke to wildfires. That's much different than some of the jurisdictional challenges in very urban settings, right? So as we go into each of these communities, we have to be sensitive to the wildfire is just one small portion of a huge challenge that these communities are facing. And, people don't think that, we may be able to stop a wildfire, but if we keep people out for weeks, it impacts billions of dollars in the wine industry. So we have to do our job as a fire service and an agency to make sure we're meeting the needs of that community.
Yeah, I never thought about, and I've been up to Napa, and I would say I like my wine. I never gave that a thought that, oh my God, that's something that's going to impact. The smoke is going to do damage to the grapes and all the other fun stuff there. Let me ask you this, and this is not a question that I put on there, but this just popped in my mind. I remember hearing somewhere that there's barriers to residents cleaning around their homes with certain protected growths and things like that in order to reduce the risk for wildfires to continue to have fuel. Is there something along those lines that needs to be worked with the legislation to improve that?
It's interesting. So we talk a lot about defensible space in California. And I think one of the challenges, I live in the middle of the city. So for me, defensible space is not really a thing, right? But for rural areas, rural communities, it is. And there are some challenges there about, how close the vegetation can be if your home's near your property's edge. There's a variety of challenges there, but I think what people have to look at is what can they do specifically to make their home more fire resistant. And I'll give you an example. Where I live in Southern California, I live in a community where, like I said, I can't do defensible space, but I can analyze my home for how I harden it, right? And so if I can do simple things that don't cost money to make sure that I don't have flammable materials up against my house. We're really focused on zone zero, meaning anywhere between 1 and 5 feet from the house, you don't have combustible materials. Are vents gonna be susceptible to embers coming in them? So I think one of the things that we have to look at, not only as a fire service, but people in the community, is how can they each uniquely do just a little bit to help the overall challenges. A lot of times in the Palisades, we saw that the main fire front wasn't what was destroying many of the homes. It was the embers that were getting into attics, or, an evacuated community where embers would get into the shrubbery against somebody's house and, potentially take out a whole block of homes because they didn't have that zone zero around their home. And so, when people are sitting a mile from the beach or a half mile from the beach, they don't necessarily recognize that wildfire is a threat. I think people are beginning to understand that more and more. But unfortunately, in everybody's busy lives, that quickly goes by. It's already been a year, and people are busy focusing on taking their kids to soccer practice, working, going to the grocery store, and preparedness tends to be an afterthought for many
Yeah.
people, including
Yeah.
many people we work with, quite frankly.
Yeah, and that's why you have to continuously put stuff out and to remind people of that. And I would have honestly, I would have never thought about the embers going into attics and vents and things along those lines. I don't my the area that I live in does not have a whole lot of wildfires. I mean, I'm in a suburban area, but I don't have. We just don't. We have fires, but they don't last very long, and the fire departments get out there and they put them out. We're lucky, but that doesn't mean it's never going to happen, and that'll have to be something I'm going to have to think about now. So, thank you.
You bet.
So let me ask this. So during a major crisis or the pandemic, when you worked at, what was the most important principles for maintaining public trust and delivering that critical information?
Well, I think the number one thing is you have to be honest. You have to be transparent. And one thing that I've always prided myself on, and I've ensured our staff is that we're never going to put ourselves in a position that we're compromising our integrity. And we have, as an agency, under the leadership of Joe Tyler, our fire chief, he has made it very clear if a mistake is made, we own that mistake and we address it head on. But what we don't do is try to be deceptive or try to hide any types of issues. And I'll tell you, I'll just give you one small example. We had a situation where we arrested one of our own employees. We have a law enforcement branch in our organization, and we arrested one of our own employees a couple years back for arson. And the first thing we did within an hour of that employee's arrest is we put out a press release with right there on the top that we arrested one of our own employees. We put it out on social media. The chief put it out on his page. And we made every effort to distribute that information as wide as possible. And people said, why would you do that? And they said, because it's the right thing to do. And if we let people know that we hold everybody accountable, including our own employees, it really shows that we have nothing to hide. We have an organization of 12,000 people. Sometimes people are going to do things that we have to hold them accountable for. And, it was a 1 day story. And many of the comments were, you know, kudos to our organization for being transparent and putting it out there.
Excellent, excellent. That's that just goes to show the integrity of the organization overall. That they're thinking of that, and I know nowadays it's gotten better, but there are still agencies that like to shove things under the rug and think they can get away with it, and then it comes back and gets them in the long run. So kudos to you guys. Nick, how does Cal Fire coordinate and communicate with other local, state, federal agencies during a unified to make sure their message is unified across multiple jurisdictions?
I can't speak how other states do it, but for us, nearly every wildfire or every large disaster in California requires interagency cooperation and a unified command perspective. And not only on large incidents, but everyday incidents. Most of the areas in California do what's called a boundary drop, meaning that the closest resource responds no matter the patch on your shoulder. So every day we're working closely with our cooperating agencies, and through the ICS system, everybody clearly understands that the incident commanders come together. They identify, an agency representative who's going to speak on behalf of all agencies that are part of unified command. And it's a real, in California, it's a real seamless process. Everybody understands, everybody has buy-in to the message. We ensure that all their needs are being addressed. We address that in how we handle our news conferences, communication to elected officials. I would say that California is extremely proficient about ensuring that we have a unified message that represents all agencies.
Excellent. Nick, what role does public education play in reducing wildfire risk, and what message resonates the most with communities when they prepare for a fire season? And I should say, fire season is year round, right?
There you go. Appreciate you referencing that. Yeah, your question is one that we ask ourselves often, right? And how do we ensure that our message is getting across to people before the threat begins? And when we talk about preparedness, we have to meet them where they are. We're working with people like Home Depot, where we're going in and having booths in Home Depot. So as people are going to Home Depot on a Saturday morning thinking about buying fertilizer for their grass, fire prevention is probably not on top of their mind. But if they walk in and they can have a 5-minute conversation with our folks and our staff can show them just some very inexpensive ways to protect themselves. That's just one element. The other elements are, our Firewise communities and working at the local level with fire safe councils and educational groups in in communities across the state, but also how we're telling that story, whether that story is in long form videos, whether it's in social media, whether it's in our newsletters. Our effort is to share that perspective, and not just a perspective from somebody in a uniform, but somebody who has either been affected by fires or working. We worked recently with USC, and we worked with a master's program in the communication school there. And we said, for you all who are in your 20s, how do we get this message across that's going to resonate with you? And what does the imagery look like? And what does the message carry? And it was really fascinating study to see, and you're going to start seeing some of that effort come to fruition here real soon in how we're
Oh, that's outstanding.
communicating.
That's outstanding, especially that younger community that they rely on social media for everything, and I'm sure the visuals are we know the visuals are different and what impacts them. So kudos to you guys for thinking out of the box on that and going to the heart of the issue and saying, hey, what works? I like that.
Yeah, it does give us some unique perspective, because what we have to recognize is we don't have all the answers. We can facilitate that, but if we can get some perspectives from, people of all ages, what they're looking for, that helps us with our, media strategy.
Right. Nick, can you just give some everyday residents on tips on how to evaluate wildfire risk and prepare evacuation plans, or just give some basic tips?
Yeah, I think the first one is go to Ready for Wildfire on our website and take a look at that, and that'll give you some detailed information. But I think the first thing, no matter where you live, ask yourself simply if somebody can find your address on your house in the middle of the night, in the worst moments of your life, and a fire engine pulling up that's never been in your house. Do they even know where you live? Do you have an address that's visible? For people who live on property, can a fire engine even make it up their driveway because trees are overgrown along driveway? Take a look at a fire hydrant around. If you have a fire hydrant in front of your house, is it cleared around that the fire department can even access it? And when you look at your house, if you weren't there, are you comfortable with how it's prepared should a wildfire come through there? Whether that be if you live in a rural area on defensible space, or you live in a community like mine where you have neighbors. Do you have that zone zero, or do you have that, prevent flammable materials away from your house? Take a moment, because when the disaster happens, it's too late.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Once it starts, especially the way most of these homes are built, they're going to go up pretty quick. Nick, looking at CAL FIRE's broader mission, how do communications and public engagement support long-term wildfire mitigation goals and community resilience?
Yeah. So when we look at, our department as a whole, it really begins with before the fire even begins. So we have a large resource management program within our organization that is not just looking at fuel reduction and forestry issues, but they're also looking at, once a fire goes through there, we have a nursery that provides last year more than 250,000 seedlings to replant areas that have been impacted by wildfires. But then we also have our Office of State Fire Marshal Division that's looking at how we can, support our communities in future growth and building and housing development. We have a response. Obviously people know us mostly for our response efforts in fires, but in CAL FIRE we recognize we're never going to be able to respond our way out of the wildfire challenge in California. So what we have to do is we have to look at what are the efforts we can make to prevent wildfires. And that's not just us as a fire service, but it's leveraging relationships with our community. It's leveraging relationships with our technology programs, and looking at the latest technology and how can we use all of these things combined to ensure we're providing the best customer service, which is preventing wildfires in California.
Excellent. As for you guys, are you into the you mentioned about like subdivision stuff like that? And I'm thinking off the thing here. Are you involved in like the planning for those subdivisions to think about egress and exit, and also potentially what could be a disaster subdivision? Or thing like that?
Yeah, most of that happens at the local level, depending on where, within local cities or local counties. And a lot of them become, much of those conversations are local level discussions. But our state fire marshal's office is very involved in that to look at how we can ensure that future development is also built safely.
Okay, excellent. From your experience, what more needs to be done at the policy level to improve wildlife readiness and response for your communication statewide?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry, you broke up.
Okay. From your experience, what needs to be done at the policy level to improve wildfire readiness and response communication statewide?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because in California, we've probably had the most support we've had probably in our agency's history over the last several years. The increase not only in the number of year-round firefighters that CAL FIRE has been given, but the increase in our aviation program. Just in the last several years, CAL FIRE has increased our helicopters with 16 brand new Black Hawk helicopters, new sea. So our response efforts continue to be supported by the governor and the legislature, which has really, really helped us in our response efforts. I think what we need to continue looking at, and it's something that I've referenced a bunch in this conversation, is continued focus on fire prevention efforts and ways to reduce fuel throughout the state of California.
Right. In regard, this is where this last question goes. What do you think the public misunderstands most about wildfire management and your role?
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. I think number one, they think that reducing fuels in California is a simple task, and it's not. And so it's a very challenging process. Number one, the state of California doesn't own all the land within the state. Much of that land is not only federally owned, but privately owned. So you have to have cooperation from your partners. And I don't mean at the federal level, I mean just parcel by parcel support by homeowners to reduce the fuel reduction. The other challenge is it's extremely costly. And, like anything we reference, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. When you get to the other end, you got to start over again, right? And every time we reduce the threat of wildfires by fuel reduction, it will continue to grow. So it's a continual process and a continual effort that has to start at the local level, at the parcel level, of people recognizing the threat and continuing to do everything they can to reduce that threat.
Thank you. Is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
I think the first question is, how can people follow us and how can people get information? And so I think, for them, take 5 minutes, go to fire.ca.gov, take a look at our website. There's an interactive map, which we post all of our wildfires on. I think also following us on all our social media platforms. But I want them to also recognize that while everybody thinks about us as a wildland firefighting agency, we are an all-risk fire department. And of our 600,000 calls, more than 400,000 of those are medical emergency related. So we are the paramedics in your community. We are the firefighters in your community. So stop by your local fire station, have a conversation, whether it's our agency or any other agency in California, and ask them what they can do in their little community to not only prevent fires, but get involved before they start.
Excellent. All right, here's some rapid fire questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Phone call or text message?
Text message.
What word do you hate hearing?
No.
Favorite adult beverage?
Modelo.
If you could live anywhere, where would that be?
Right where I am in Southern California.
If you could adopt an animal, real or mythical, what would it be?
Ooh, a giraffe.
What's the one song that always gets you moving no matter the mood?
Hell's Bells.
Good song. Play it safe or roll the dice? What's your instinct in a crisis?
I think it depends on the situation. I would say I'm 50-50, but I'll say most of the time, roll the dice.
Who do you call or text when you need a gut check?
My wife.
Yep. Happy wife, happy life. Yep.
You bet.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Salty or sweet?
Sweet.
Which historical figure would you want to shadow for a day and not just meet?
Jesus.
That would be an interesting conversation. Yeah,
it would
definitely. What key points would you like listeners to take from today's interview?
I think the key point is that you can't rely on the fire service for everything. And oftentimes people are reluctant to say that we can't solve all your problems. But when disaster strikes, you have to be prepared and you have to realize, as difficult as it is, there's not going to be a fire engine at every house. So what you do ahead of time often is going to impact the outcome of a disaster.
Isn't that true? Your own first responders. Absolutely. As we wrap this up, Nick, is there a piece of wisdom or a motto that you live by?
For me is, work harder. Nobody cares. And what I mean by that is that for me, I recognize that we're all replaceable. When I retire, somebody will step in. But each day I try to do something that's going to make our organization, our program just a little bit better. And by doing that, I hope I'm creating an opportunity for mentorship, for guidance, and leaving a legacy that somebody can fill in my shoes. And when I leave, they can forget about me, but know that the organization's continuing.
Outstanding. How can people best reach you if they want to connect or follow up?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn. Our organization and the leadership within our organization is pretty good about sharing all the things that they're doing. And if somebody has a question or has a suggestion, I'd love to hear from them.
I will add that into the show notes. Nick, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.